Hello. Today we're going to be talking about Chapter 13 in the book, Loosening the Grip, Drugs of Abuse Other Than Alcohol. And we've gone over some of these already, and here we've talked a little bit about them, and we talk a lot about them in the 1304 pharmacology class. So if you've had 1304, this is a bit of a review. If you haven't had it, it's a bit of an introduction. And we'll be discussing that for a little while today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you, and we'll get right into it. I think that did it. I hope that did it. Anyway, we'll see. Drugs of abuse other than alcohol. If you're following along in the book, they tell you in the beginning of chapter 13 that so far the focus has been on alcohol, and which it has. Is one of the more problem drugs that we've had experience with in our country, and we still have a lot of problems with alcohol, as we've clearly seen. But if you go to any old AA meeting in town, you'll find people whose drug of choice may have been alcohol, but most of them will have had some experience with some of these other drugs. And some may still be using some of these other drugs. Just as you can go to a Narcotics Anonymous meeting and find people who consider themselves sober but still able to have a drink every once in a while. Anyway, the prevalence of drug use in the United States is broken down by demographic factors, and that still currently the age of people who are using illicit drugs, around 40% of them was under the age of 26, or at least it was at the time of this writing. This is attributable not because of the fact that younger people are using fewer drugs, it's because older people are using more. Anyway, we have some very skewed perspectives about what constitutes drug use, who's using it, how they're using it, where they're using it, what kind they're using, etc. So we're going to talk about some of that. And you can look at these tables for yourself. There's nothing more dreadfully boring to me than going over numbers in a chart that I can read for myself. But compared to other eras, the age group with the most dramatic changes in illicit drug use are those in their late 50s and early 60s, the baby boomers, the now getting older hippies. I'm my group. The rate of illicit drug use in that age group is considerably higher than at any time in the past. Gender-wise, women have caught up with men a lot. But tobacco use, for instance, lung cancer used to be a male disease. If 50 years ago, if someone had lung cancer, it was almost always a guy. And today, they're almost 50-50. But men continue to have a higher rate of current illicit drug use than women. But under 18 is really close. Boys and girls have roughly the same numbers in that regard. Education, there's not a tidy relationship between, and it depends on the drug too, illicit drug use, but basically college grads are more likely than those who've not completed the high school to have used illicit drugs at some point. But the number of those using declines. College graduates are less likely to be using illicit drugs than those with less education. That doesn't mean that education provides immunity from substance use disorder, however, because there are plenty of very well-educated drug addicts out there. Historically, employment status is correlated. Among those 26 and older, it's 7% among those working full-time, 8 for people working part-time, and 14 for those who are unemployed. And when you're looking at numbers here, the book also asks you to think about the fact that a lot of these numbers are basically estimates, and which is a nice way of saying we're guessing at it, because they don't have real solid numbers about that. But one thing that we do know is among substance abuse using population, we have people who have dual diagnosis, co-occurring psychiatric disorders. In some cases, they have a horrible employment history, and occasionally we find people who are just basically really unemployable. And we find people who are unemployed who are self-medicating with drugs. We have people who are unemployed because they're addicted to drugs and very poor employees. So there's a lot of interrelationship between unemployment, homelessness, drug use, mental illness, etc. So statistics, data in this regard can sometimes be messy. Geographic regions. The West and the Northeast have the highest rates of current illicit drug use, the lowest rates in the South. The rate in the Midwest is in between. Illicit drug use is highest in metropolitan areas, but we also see that there are drug use problems in rural areas that stand out rather glaringly, like the way Purdue's OxyContin was distributed in rural areas, and it became such a problem for them, for people in the country, that OxyContin soon became known as hillbilly heroin. Anyway, social costs. The federal government in 2011 had a report that estimated the annual social economic costs from drug use to be in the vicinity of $193 billion. And this includes the health care costs and loss in productivity, which is a very big deal. We have what's called a $1 billion hangover every year in the United States, where accidents on the job, loss of productivity, etc., and so forth, and cost businesses who employ people who are in the workforce and abusing drugs, including alcohol. Millions of dollars, billions of dollars, in fact. The mythical numbers is, well, I already spoke about that, the magnitudes of the numbers really require guessing at what's what out there. And sometimes it leads to misunderstandings. If you ever figure how the federal government estimates can take a pin joint and make it cost $200, then you'll get an idea of how their estimates on their seized shipments work. Anyway, it's hard to do. We know how much marijuana is seized by the DEA, for instance, or how much cocaine or how much fentanyl. We don't know how much gets through as an estimate. That's a guess. It may be an educated guess, and it may be something that we can justify by saying, well, this is how many users we have in the United States, approximately, and this is how much of the drug they do every year, annually, approximately. And this is how much of it we seized, approximately. So this is how much got through, approximately. And people do the best they can with that, but be skeptical when you look at numbers. Crime and incarceration in the United States. Now that's something that we can look at. We can say this many crimes happened in this period of time. We apprehended this many people for it. And in 2011, the data here indicates that 1.53 million arrests were for drug abuse violations, and that's more than for any other arrest, around 14% of all arrests. And the next common category was larceny and theft, followed by DWI, which is another drug offense. So if you add the DWI with the drug violations, then by far the most arrests were for substance-related crime. And sometimes just having the drug, simple possession, is a crime. Guess which drug most people get busted for having? And you're right. It's that old devil weed, that marijuana assassin of youth. And that's the one that most people get busted for. In this, the author notes that our approach to dealing with drugs, our legal approaches, arresting people for substances, is like declaring a war on drugs, and then pointing to its success by saying, look how many jaywalkers we've arrested. Drug arrests account for the largest portion of arrests, with DWI in the number 3 slot. If the arrests for liquor law violations and drunkenness were combined with DWI, then alcohol-related arrests would move to the number 1 spot, representing 24% of all arrests. So the distinctions can be misleading. There are lots of medical problems that are associated with drug use, and some are related directly to the use of the drug, how it's used, what the drug itself is, what the properties of the drug is, route of administration, whether it's been adulterated with something or stomped in drug parlage. Accidents and injuries are related to the secondary effects of being intoxicated. You are more likely to have a wreck if you're drunk when you drive. You're more likely to have an accident at home if you're under the influence of pain medication or marijuana. If you are eating the drug, then there can be problems with that, eating too much, overdosing, and what have you. But if you're using things like injectables, then your route of administration is a risk in itself. If you're drinking alcohol, is there a risk of overdose? Yes, there is. But how about if you put it in an enema bag and get a bum rush? The risk increases. So how you ingest a drug, how you get it, how you introduce a drug into your system has risks and benefits associated with it. Illicit drug manufacture is a big problem in the United States. There's no pharmaceutical controls on illicit drugs. People can make it in their garage, or wherever. And there's no control of dosage, no control of purity, no weeding out necessarily of contaminants. So everything that is involved for the user is risky, but it's also risky for the manufacturer because a lot of these chemicals are volatile. I don't know about you guys, but there was a show on TV some years back that I really liked. It's called My Name is Earl. And there was one episode where Earl and Crabman and Joy and Randy were sitting around in the trailer, and there was a boom, and one of the guys in there said, "Oops, there went the Joneses meth lab," and one of the others said, "That wasn't the Joneses, that was the Johnsons." And then they counted 1, 2, 3, 4, and then debris hit the roof of the trailer, and Earl said, "The Joneses," you know. So they were used to the risks of meth manufacture. Meth manufacture, by the way, manufacturing causes another problem, which is toxic waste. For every pound of crystal methamphetamine that's produced by an illicit lab, you're subject to getting 5 to 7 pounds of toxic waste that has to be disposed of. So that's an issue. They also note that the authors note that sex work may be a part of the drug scene, whether it's to finance a drug habit or to cover basic expenses. And this increases, risk for communicable diseases, including HIV. Tattoos and body piercings are more common among drug users than among the general population. And if it's a do-it-yourself effort, all kinds of bad things can happen. Tuberculosis is most common among people with drug problems and is related to poor health generally. And TB is also a disease that in our century and our time is associated with poverty. It wasn't always. As a matter of fact, consumption was a pretty romanticized disease in the 19th century, but not today. A variety of factors influence how people view a drug, legal status being way up there with them. A drug's legal status really doesn't have a whole lot to do sometimes with how healthy, useful, or how dangerous a substance is. Alcohol's a dangerous drug. Not so much, as we've noticed, not so much because of the overdose factor, but because of things like car wrecks, drownings, fires, secondary illnesses, all of that. Tobacco products are products that will kill roughly 50% of the people who use them. That's 1 out of 2 people will die, or their deaths will be somehow related to their use of tobacco. And that's not even a maybe. So that people who are smoking are really engaging in dangerous behavior. And both alcohol and tobacco are legal. You can, go down to the supermarket, providing you're of age, and purchase it at Kroger's. You don't have to look very far to do that. Drugs that are illegal tend to be looked down upon, and anyway, even though they may, people who don't use drugs look at drug use one way. People who use marijuana look at it another way. People who use heroin look at it yet another way. And how the drug use is viewed in society depends a lot on which person or which group of people are doing the looking. Father Martin addressed this in one of his talks on alcoholism, that there are some religions that disapprove of drinking, period. Baptists being one of them. But wherever you find 4 Catholics, you usually find a 5th. That was Father Martin, not Howard Bushart. But people who are religious and who frown on drinking are also likely to frown on the use of marijuana or even other prescribed medications, etc. People go to prison for using substances, and minorities go to prison at a much higher rate than do Caucasians. In the public health field, harm reduction is a respectable approach to reducing drug use among people, and you're going to be familiar with that by the time you get out of here, if you're not already. But harm reduction has been seen as somewhat problematic when illegal drugs are involved, because you can have some really serious consequences from using illegal drugs, whether there's an issue of dependency or not. Who knows when your next shot of heroin is going to be a hot shot because you've got a sudden jump in purity or a certain jump in the inclusion of harmful substances. Some narcotics that you find being out on the streets today have some fentanyl included in the mix, and fentanyl is a very potent narcotic that's really easy to OD on. So harm reduction has its drawbacks in that regard. Historically, a number of drugs that we consider drugs of abuse were originally considered therapeutic agents. They were commonly prescribed. Opium products, laudanum, marijuana has been used in prescriptions, cocaine, you name it. And these drugs now, these drugs still have medical usefulness, but now they're also carrying with them a bad reputation. And a drug that gets bad reputation, as we already know, in society, becomes a drug that our first impulse is to make it illegal and prosecute those who use it. And that was certainly the case with some of these narcotics. There's an interesting story over here about William Stewart Halstead, who was a surgeon who brought about a lot of medical advances, but he was addicted to cocaine for about 40 years. And he went into a hospital for treatment of his cocaine addiction and came out with another addiction to morphine that lasted the rest of his life. The author asks us to rethink the prohibition as a drug policy. And I'll probably put this as an assignment in your classroom to research the Portuguese experiment. Not many years ago, Portugal had one of the highest narcotic addiction and overdose rates in Europe. They made a decision as a nation to stop viewing this as a crime against society. They decided to view addiction instead as a public health problem and approach it from a public health perspective, which they did. They decriminalized it. They made programs available to people. If a person was arrested for doing a crime and it was determined that they were committing this crime because of their drug addiction, then they were given alternatives to going and sitting in jail, and these alternatives included treatment. So I won't give too much of that away, but once they shifted their focus, they also shifted their approach to how they dealt with these drug problems in society, and consequently their OD rate went way down, and it seems to be working for them. we're seeing some changes in our society too, mostly around marijuana right now, but we'll see other changes as society evolves. Our perspectives on drug use should evolve too. Should evolve. That's not a promise. The potential impact of medical marijuana will have on public sentiment, and this was written several years ago, seemed to be prophetic, because now we've got a number of states, including Colorado and Washington, and others who not only are allowing medical marijuana to be used in their states, but also have opened it up to recreational marijuana. And we talked about that in another course just this past week, where you can go into shops in Denver or Boulder and find edibles that are manufactured from cannabis products, find different types of marijuana there that you can smoke, hashish, dabs, all kinds of good products there. And that's going to change, and already is changing, the way drugs are viewed in the states where the way marijuana is viewed in those states that are legal. It's not always changing the way they're viewed for the good. In Colorado, for instance, there are plenty of people who view this as a horrible situation and one of the worst moves that Colorado could ever make. So it's not all sunshine and roses, here that now people aren't getting arrested, and now we're getting more tax monies that we can use for schools, et cetera, et cetera. And the marijuana industry will point that out to people who are looking at their situations. But other people will point out too that, these are sometimes very potent concoctions that you're putting together, that you're selling them. You're selling them to a lot of young people who, might not have been using them otherwise if they were still illegal, et cetera, and so forth. Because a substance is legal doesn't make it healthy or good or anything. It just makes it legal. And, I give you alcohol and nicotine. That's just the way it is, huh? Economic realities. There's a lot of money in drugs. That's why people get in and sell it and all of that stuff. You can take a small amount of money and turn it into a whole lot of money in a relatively short time if you're, if you're an entrepreneur. I just finished reading a book not too long ago that was written by Freeway Ricky Ross. And Freeway Rick is considered kind of the Ronald McDonald of crack cocaine in America. He is the inventor of the crack house. And he marketed ran a business that made millions every day. And the profits associated with that for a poor kid who grew up in Los Angeles was it was staggering. And his associates too. They had so much money they didn't know what to do with it. So the drug business, if we're looking at making scads and scads of money, you and I are on the wrong end of the drug business, But at the same time, while making those scads of money, you're participating in something that's really unhealthy for your customers and for the country that you live in, the society that you live in. But the rate of the profit in the worldwide drug trade the money that's involved is staggering, absolutely staggering. Flexibility in the drug trades is an interesting concept. Drug trade is a stable business. One of the things that I think it was the president of Belize back in early 90s, somewhere in there, that said, why are you blaming the people in South and Central America for the cocaine problem in the United States? We don't make anybody use it. You know, if our cocaine is giving you problems over there, stop buying it. You know, as long as people are buying it, there are going to be people who are going to sell it, and that's basically true. That's and nothing could be more capitalistic than that. If there's a market for it, then we'll sell it to you. Flexibility. How would you make a shift? Say, for instance, if you had an Operation Intercept at the United States southern border, or say you built a wall along the United States southern border to stop traffickers, what do you think they would do? Absolutely correct. They're flexible. They'll find another way to go into the country other than that port that you blocked off, other than that part of the desert you built a wall on or whatever. Generally speaking, when we made it hard to get marijuana across the border from Mexico, they began selling cocaine and bringing it in through Florida, into Miami instead of into El Paso. So there's all kinds of flexibility that people can do. Our wars on marijuana have almost always led to a concomitant increase in other drug use. And they're talking about methods of cultivation and space needed for marijuana production, and that's true. You need ground. If you're growing marijuana traditionally, you need fields. You don't have to necessarily have fields. You go down on the Trinity bottom down there and out in the woods, just plant marijuana between the trees all over the place, and don't forget where you planted them. You get a little harvest going. If you're making meth out in the woods, chances are pretty good you're hurting wildlife. One of the things you could see if you were flying over a place, say a little shack out in the woods where someone's cooking meth, you might see a drain pipe coming out the side, and there'll be a brown swath like a path leading down to the bar ditch, and everything will be dead in the bar ditch where the chemicals hit the water, and then the bar ditch will take it to the creek, and out in the creek a ways everything will be dead from where the chemicals hit the water. But anyway, those are hazardous, and some of the fertilizers and things that are used for the marijuana are hazardous as well. Hydroponics, is a flexibility move. You can grow things inside. You can grow sensimilla. You can grow hydroponic marijuana whose roots never touch the ground. There's flexibility among users who will, and this is the truth, especially among dedicated stoners, is that, I've always considered it like eating ice cream. I may like weed. That's what I want to smoke, but there isn't any weed. So, I'll drop some acid, or I may like acid. There isn't any acid, so I'll smoke some crystal. I like ice cream. I have my favorites, and I'd rather have those, but I'll eat what's in the freezer. Sorting through federal reports to secure information on the war on drugs is a challenge, says this author, who is sorting through information to get, to provide on the war on drugs. Justice Department, Office of the President, FBI, DEA, and the list goes on. And now we've also got things, this is wonderful, it's on the internet. Y'all know that for instance, that ship that was stuck in the Suez Canal a couple of weeks ago had containers on there that was full of smuggled children, dead bodies, fentanyl, marijuana, nuclear weapons, nuclear waste, and other types of weapons of mass destruction, etc., and so forth, which was all bullshit, but is on the internet. And people jump on it and say, aha, because anything you find on Facebook, for instance, is valid information in it. Yeah, we know better than that. Anyway, using the total of drug arrests as a measure of enforcement can be misleading. And over a several-year period, the increase in drug arrests were primarily attributable to marijuana. And that's, and again, this is like waging a war on crime and finding success in the number of arrests for jaywalking. The societal cost of prohibition is pretty staggering. We spend a lot of money on enforcement, and generally speaking, we don't shut down anything. That's the honest truth. We don't shut down much of anything. The illicit drug industry absorbs its losses and keeps right on trucking. Here's a cool little Cocaine Lil and Morphine Sue, a poem that was turned into a song towards the end of the Jazz Age. And I just found it kind of cool. So did the author, he included it. The source of drugs vary with particular drugs, and sometimes sources are we look to do our interdiction at sources. For instance, if you go into the local CVS and ask to buy some Sudafed, they'll probably ask you to sign a piece of paper. If you ask to buy a whole crate of Sudafed or all the Sudafed that they have on the shelf, you will really cause eyebrows to shoot up. And this is a source of drug production. Some drugs come from, as we already know, come from poppies, for instance, give us opiates, and opiates give us the chemical structure that leads to opioids and to semi-synthetic, analogs, etc. Coca gives us cocaine, and the derivatives of cocaine. Cannabis gives us, marijuana is marijuana, and gives us the products that are extracted from that. With the illicit drug labs, you're usually using other chemicals to create a product, and these other chemicals can be dangerous in a lot of ways. They can be poison, they can be toxic. One of my favorite shows on TV of the last decade was Breaking Bad, and Bryan Cranston did a marvelous job as Walter White in there. And in one episode, some bad guy drug dealers, were threatening Walter and Jesse while they were manufacturing some of their excellent methamphetamine out in the New Mexican desert. And Jesse and Walter trapped them in the RV that they were using as a lab, locked the doors on them, and Walter poisoned them with the chemicals that he was using to make methamphetamine with. You hear some horror stories sometimes about meth labs. They are explosive. One of the byproducts of cooking meth is anhydrous ammonia, which is a floor-hugging gas, and can be toxic to pets and children. It could be toxic to adults too. But I don't know when's the last time I heard of a child being poisoned because Dad was cooking meth in the apartment, but it happens. Pharmaceuticals, they're legal, they're prescribed, and if you have a prescription for them, they're legal for you to have, they're legal for you to take. They're not legal for you to be loaded on out in public or to be loaded on and driving. You can still get pulled over and charged. You can get charged with driving under the influence if you're taking Benadryl, which also affects your ability to react, etc. So prescription drug use is a problem, particularly when it's used for non-medical purposes, but it can be a problem all the time. And again, you can have consequences related to any drug use, licit or illicit, that are apart from dependency. You don't have to be drug dependent to overdose on Vicodin if they're prescribed to you. You don't have to be drug dependent to overdose on Vicodin that's prescribed to anyone. A couple of years ago, Dr. Kaufman and I attended a conference in Houston, the National Association of Alcoholism and Drug Abuse Counselors Conference. And the day we were there, the first day of the conference, a news story broke in Houston, University of Houston, that a young man, an athlete there at the school, had bought some pain pills. I think they were Vicodin, may have been OxyContin or whatever, and he shared them with his best friend, and his best friend overdosed and died because the pills had been contained fentanyl, and they were bootleg. There's risks anytime you're doing things illegally and purchasing drugs illegally and using them illicitly. The likelihood of this happening is a likelihood. It's not a strong likelihood. The young man would not have hurt his friend. He had no intention of doing anything that was dangerous for either of them. They were using drugs because drugs made them feel good, and that was the purpose of it. But we have pill mills in the United States where you can, and we have distributors in the United States, like the pain clinics, and we've talked about those before. Oh my goodness, that's confidentiality stuff there popping up. Anyway, email alerts. You can get a Houston cocktail by going to some of these pain clinics. You go in and tell them, my back hurts and I need something for it, and what do you get? A Houston cocktail is basically Soma, which they sell as a muscle relaxer, and it relaxes everything you got. Straight up dope. And a narcotic pain medication, Vicodin, OxyContin, something along that line, and a benzodiazepine, Valium, or Xanax. So you get the benzodiazepine, the CNS depressant, and the opioid together, and that is your basic Houston cocktail. Folks used to get out with the homeless people. Distributors would get with the homeless people and send them to pain clinics and have them get a prescription. They'd bring the prescription back and give it to the dealer for a certain amount of money, or for some of the drugs or some other considerations. And drugs that can be gotten this way are sold at a market price that's commensurate with other pharmacies and things like that. But when you convert it to putting it on the street, then the cost of the drug jumps up considerably. The practice of diverting drugs away from their intended pharmaceutical purpose into recreational use or street drugs is called drug diversion. When you engage in drug diversion, you're acquiring a drug and using it for something other than its intended purpose. So there are steps that some companies have taken to reduce drug diversion. The first of that that I'm aware of began when they put certain chemicals in cough syrup to keep people from overdosing on it, keep people from using it to get high because you'd get sick, putting pieces of they call, I don't really know the chemical process, but basically they put very small pieces of plastic in Prelude, so that if you tried to cook it up, it would glob. It wouldn't cook worth a damn, so you couldn't shoot it. Anyway, pharmaceutical companies have been doing things like putting naloxone into opiate medication so that you can't get high on it, or the high is really significantly reduced. A problem that we had a few years back was with the Rohypnol, which is a benzodiazepine and a CNS depressant. If you put Rohypnol, which is colorless and tasteless and odorless, into someone's drink and they drink it, it produces dissociative type symptomologies, and it's been known as a date rape drug. Hoffman LaRoche put in an additive to their to Rohypnol, that if you put it into an alcoholic beverage, it turns a milky white, so that you can see it in the drink. So there are things that the pharmaceutical companies could do, to make drugs safer and to prevent drug diversion, the misuse of the substances that they're putting together. This is of particular interest for me here on page 536. As for Purdue Pharmacy, the manufacturer of OxyContin, sadly the criticism that has been leveled is far, far less than deserved. In other words, they got off easy. In May 2007, Purdue pled guilty to false marketing practices. The company long claimed that OxyContin was less addictive than other opioids. It isn't. That there was far less danger of withdrawal. There's not. And that the active ingredient was less easily extracted. It isn't. Making diversion less likely. Nope. All of these claims were false. Sales representatives used bogus scientific charts to support these points as they made their rounds of physicians' offices. The false claims continued for at least 7 years after physicians first began raising questions in light of the high rates of OxyContin abuse they encountered. particularly in rural areas. That's where it got to be known, particularly in Appalachia, as OxyContin, hillbilly heroin. And we've seen and still see that relatively recently, like last year or the year before, there was a suit brought against Purdue because they had sold enough. They had sold like 1 million doses of OxyContin in a town with a few thousand people in it. It's unbelievable. So the drug diversion is a problem, and it's certainly something that's common in the drug using world. Okay, let's see. Several key concepts in the use of drugs should be considered as how to judge whether or not a drug is problematic, or effective or whatever. The route of administration is the first one. And for a long time, the only routes of administration we had were orally. We either drank it, ate it, whatever, or we smoked it, was another way to get it in there. We put some things on our bodies, turned it into salves and poultices and what have you. But in around 1854, 56, somewhere around in there, the hypodermic syringe was invented, and that changed the way drugs have been used, forever. There are long-term consequences associated with the way a drug is used. If you're using injectables and you use them daily and do it a lot, there's all kinds of risk for transmission of disease, of overdose factors, impurity factors, infections, collapsed veins, tracking, all kinds of stuff that can be a consequence of using drugs in that manner. Where drugs have their effect in your body has something to do with as a factor for drug use. Site of action. What does it do? How does it do that? Metabolism refers to how a drug is broken down and removed by the body. And some drugs, psilocybin, for instance, if you take psilocybin mushroom, psilocybin's fairly powerful. It's a powerful hallucinogen. It is. But the first stage metabolite of psilocybin is psilocin, which is an even more powerful hallucinogen, and it's, of course, present in much lesser amounts. So some drugs, get more potent as you break them down rather than less potent. If you drink methyl alcohol rather than ethyl alcohol, the first stage metabolite of ethyl alcohol is acetaldehyde. The first stage metabolite of methyl alcohol is formaldehyde, which is a much different chemical, or as a similar chemical, but it has a much more deleterious effect on the human body. So metabolism is an issue. And solubility in fat or water is important to how a drug gets distributed in the body. An old mentor of mine, Spencer Andrews, said one of the very best ways to tell if a person has a drug problem or not is to take his drug away from him and see what happens. And what happens with some is abstinence syndrome, or with withdrawal. And what that means is that in a certain amount of time after my last ingestion of my drug of choice, that period of abstinence, the further I get away from that use, the more likely I am in the short haul to experience withdrawal, and these are predictable symptoms that emerge after discontinuation of the use of drugs. And different drugs have different withdrawal symptoms, and some of these are awfully unpleasant. Others are just relatively annoying, but some are dangerous. CNS depressants are dangerous if you're withdrawing from them, from phenobarbital, the barbiturates, methaqualone, any of those CNS depressant drugs, including alcohol, can produce seizures, which can be fatal. Other drugs, and other drugs do not present life-threatening situations in the withdrawal period, unless it's something idiosyncratic, unexpected. Abuse potential. No one wants to buy my drug, no matter how good it is, if I tell them, if you take it now, you'll get an effect sometimes between 45 minutes from now and 3 days. That doesn't work. I'm not real happy about taking a drug that's not going to give me an effect for 45 minutes. I mean, I'm an American. I want what I want, and I want it now. Right? So if I'm taking a drug, I want it to be fast. I want it to be relatively intense, too. I mean, I like something that comes on fast. That's me. Other people don't like intensities in their highs. They like to go mellow. But I'm more of an intensity guy. And I get a drug like cocaine, which is an intensity-producing drug, and I can snort it, I can smoke it, I can shoot it. So I've got a lot of options, and I can play with them till I find the combinations that I like. There's some definitions of medical terms over here on the left. I'm not going to quiz you over them, but it's really a good idea to get to know what these terms are. Autonomic symptomologies of drug use, elevations in blood pressure, heart rate, etc. Bruxism is associated closely with the use of stimulants, methamphetamine, cocaine, etc. Bruxism, grinding and clenching teeth. Derealization, feeling detached, depersonalized. That's common with PTSD, which a lot of our clients will suffer from. Dysarthria, which is speech difficulties. Dyskinesias, abnormal involuntary movements. Remember tardive dyskinesia. Dysphoria, which is unease. They say dis-ease. That's a cutesy-poo way of saying it, but it's opposite of euphoria. Basically, it's feeling bad. Dystonias, muscle spasms, endocarditis, buildup of bacteria around heart valves. Happens with a lot of the drugs that you may be injecting or snorting. Hypersomnia, lacrimation, shedding tears, crying, nystagmus, flickering back and forth eye movements. We have a real tough time in controlling our eyes. That's what the cops are looking for, by the way, when they're waving the pen around in front of your face and asking you to follow it. Rhabdomyolysis, a breakdown of muscle tissue. Rhinorrhea, runny nose, stereotypic, and synesthesias, crossing sensory pathways, seeing sounds, feeling sights, tasting color. That's a trip. Anyway, those are some things for you to know, because you'll hear them used. The So patterns of use are something that we look for in the United States if we're into looking at it from a public health or sociological perspective. Patterns of use are also what we look for in individuals, and if you want to know, like my friend Spencer said, if a person has a drug problem, you can take away his dope and see what happens then, how he responds to that. Or you can just look at the record and patterns of use and the consequences of those patterns of use indicate whether a problem is there or not. Abuse potential is a pharmacological concept. It's based on the effects of a drug. Social influences, though, however, influence the likelihood of a person using this drug or that drug and under what circumstances, etc., and so forth. Many of us who got involved in doing drugs for the first time, whether it be alcohol or cigarettes or chewing tobacco or whatever it was, did that because someone else wanted us to, or we conspired to do it with our friends. Johnny and I, my childhood pal, swiped some of his uncle's Marlin's beer and a plug of his dad's chewing tobacco and went down under the Halls Bio Bridge over Tedwell Road and got really sick on it. Experimentation. And once that curiosity is satisfied, we don't have to do it anymore, right? No, wrong. Over the course of the next few years, I don't know when that happened, I think I was 10, something like that. Over the course of the next few years, by the time I was 18, I'd been introduced to some other substances and things like that. I'd smoked marijuana. I had taken pocket rockets. So that, I tried some other things too. Got around to doing some acid as well a little after that. So, a lot of people start early on. And drug use generally increases for people who have a propensity to developing a problem with it. They develop that problem fairly rapidly when they start young. And so consequently, that's where we see a lot of the problems emerging. It's noted here that for those above age 30, there's typically a drop among those who perceive easy access for obtaining drugs. But there is one notable exception, and that's the 50-year-olds who perceive cocaine as readily available. And how we look at it. And among people who are over 50, as we've already noted, there's an increase incidence of drug abuse among some older people. Problems associated with illicit drugs are often similar to alcohol, but with other drugs, there's the presence of contaminants as well as byproducts of metabolism are a concern. And they go in to talk about MPTP. It's inducing symptoms of Parkinson's disease, and this was a result of bootleg meperidine or Demerol. There's toxicity, and there are other drugs. Like I said a while ago, the bootleg Vicodin that two U of H athletes ingested, which killed one of them, was laced with fentanyl. And you have people, they'll rent a storage space, go inside and press pills to their little heart's content, and they may have their own recipe for making their bootleg Vicodin, OxyContin, Valium, Xanax, Librium, whatever it is they're putting together. You, dear hearts, the consumer, are the test pilots on these things, and we'll see how it goes from there. Toxicity and overdose is likely with a number of these products. And I don't attribute this to people, having ill intent. It's not, like Dexter finds a new way to off people, although that may happen from time to time. What I really suspect is going on here is that they're either not real good chemists or they're pretty sloppy in the way they put things together. And if your drug manufacturer is sloppy in the way he puts his product together, then the product that you get for your use on the street may be subpar. In the 80s and 90s, we had X clubs in the Houston area. And these sprung up and lasted for a good long while, like Power Tools and Ecstasy Club. And people would go there, and a lot of kids in the Pasadena, Deer Park area, and probably in Baytown too, although I wasn't there at the time, were using were using ecstasy. And what we found out was that a bunch of these people using ecstasy had never been in the same room with ecstasy. People who were putting the club drugs together for them were putting together all sorts of little various chemical concoctions, but methyl-dioxymethamphetamine wasn't one of them. Anyway, we classify drugs by various schemas. Most of the time, it's when we talk about drugs in the substance abuse field, we're talking about uppers, downers, hallucinogens, etc. We talk about them by their effects, their families, so to speak. Sometimes we talk about drugs as being illicit or illicit, legal or illegal. And then we have, for legal purposes, for people who are prosecuting in the Food and Drug Administration, et cetera, that are, they talk about controlled substances as Schedule 1, Schedule 2, Schedule 3, Schedule 4. And we've talked about this already, but the schedules are relatively self-explanatory there. Controlled substances, analogs, are identified by their chemical formulas, and there are lots of analogs. Heroin's an analog. An analog is where you put a couple of things together and derive something else for it. A Porsche is a Porsche. It doesn't matter if it comes in charcoal gray or bright red. To plug up this loophole in drug laws with the designer drugs, which are drugs that have been tinkered with. You change it a little bit from a substance that's illegal to legal. And these controlled substances, analogs, became a new category for law enforcement. And we see that there are still problems with that. Most recently with the so-called synthetic marijuana, and you could stop at convenience stores and gas stations and buy packages of this stuff. It's some of them, and they're, of course, as you know, not for human consumption. Incense, whatever the hell they're putting on there. And they were perfectly legal. And people did use them and did experience problems with them. And then laws were passed. And now, if they have certain chemicals in them, they are the certain chemicals that are used as manufacturing to create these concoctions are illegal and are scheduled now. We already talked about pharmacological effects. Here's a pretty, this is pretty much review stuff. Nicotine. Nicotine is an addictive chemical. It produces addiction on the part of users. Smokers, tobacco chewers, that hookah users, e-cigarette people, vaping, all of this is, there's very few people who are social in this regard. People who start fooling around smoking and stuff tend to become addicted to it. Nicotine is very addictive. It's one of the hardest addictions to stop, in my estimation. I mean, it is really tough to quit smoking for some people. I don't know, I used to believe like Mark Twain. Mark Twain said that stopping smoking is easy. I do it all the time. And I kind of felt like that for a while. So if at first you don't succeed, quit again. Most people don't stop the first time they try. But it's not just a difficult addiction to quit. It's a pretty easy one to get, and it's a terrifically dangerous one. As noted earlier, if you smoke, people who use tobacco products, 1 out of 2 of them will die because of that use. Their life will be shortened, or they'll die directly because they were smokers. It's been devastating in my family personally. My father died of lung cancer. 2 of my little brothers died of lung cancer. The other one died of liver cancer and liver failure secondary to hepatitis C and smoking. It's, my mother used tobacco products. She died of cancer. Wow, huh? Overall, men are more likely to use tobacco than are women, but the gender gap is disappearing, as mentioned earlier. Among adults, higher levels of education is associated with lower levels of tobacco use. Employment status, the highest rate of tobacco use is among the unemployed, and the lowest rate among other, which includes homemakers, students, the retired, and the disabled. Other illnesses. A population that is absolutely devastated by tobacco use are people who have a mental illness or a mental diagnosis, psychiatric diagnosis, probably the best way of putting it. People who are bipolar and are heavy tobacco users. And I don't know, I'm really not sure what a pack of cigarettes costs right now. I think it's up around $9 for a brand name pack of cigarettes. But, I quit smoking when it hit $3. I'm not going to pay $3 for a pack of cigarettes. I'm not going to pay more than $20 for a bag of weed either. So there. And that's too high. Okay, Howard, that's 1975 prices. Yeah, close, but actually not. 1975, I think a pack of cigarettes was something like 60 cents. When I started smoking, it was 35. Anyway, so much for the old days, huh? Abuse potential is extremely high with nicotine, so is the dependence potential. The nicotine works in receptor sites in the brain, and it works as a stimulant. and it works as a bolus dosage. And what that means is that every time you go and inhale, then that gas containing the nicotine it is in the lungs, is absorbed in the bloodstream, goes straight to the brain, and boom, reacts at receptor sites. And how many puffs do you take off of a cigarette? Good question. That's maybe, kind of like how many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop. But every time you do an inhalation like that, you exhale some of the smoke, the nicotine's absorbed through the lungs, goes into the bloodstream, hits the brain, activates. Then you take another puff, and it goes through the lungs, into the bloodstream, into the brain, and activates. Then you take another puff. Well, you get my drift. There is no other drug that we use the way we use cigarettes. You don't smoke joints like that. You don't smoke crack like that. How many cigarettes does a person, say we do 20 puffs, I'm just grabbing that because I like round numbers, with a cigarette, and then that per cigarette, and then we have 20 cigarettes in a pack. That's 200 puffs, right? Actually, it's more than that. What is 20 times 20? Yeah, that's 200. No. How about that? I can even multiply 20 by 20 without a calculator. $400 puffs. I know I was in the ballpark. 400 puffs. You don't do 400 puffs of weed. I mean, I don't know anybody who does 400 puffs of weed over the course of a day's time, really. And you certainly don't have 400 drinks or eat 400 pills or any of that. So if I'm engaging in cigarette smoking, even a pack a day, I'm doing a whole hell of a lot of lighting it and all of that good stuff. So I'm engaged in that. And I get a habituation that's a part of that addiction too, so that when I do things automatically. And if you're a smoker, you probably have done this, which is you reach in your pocket, get a cigarette out, or in your purse and light it, and then turn around and there's another cigarette in the ashtray that you've already lit and then forgot about. Anyhow, it's a dangerous practice. It's a devastatingly injurious practice over the course of years. If you're smoking cigarettes, if you live long enough and you smoke enough, smoking will kill you. There's this survey here, the Fagerstrom test for nicotine dependence. If you're a smoker out there, you can take this and see what you think about it. But let me tell you, if you're a grown-up and you're a smoker out there, I can already tell you, it's not a hobby. It's not a habit. If you're an adult smoker, your chances that you're not addicted to the cigarettes are slim and none, and slim's out of town. There's a lot of literature on smoking cessation. There's groups that are available for smoking cessation. If you stop smoking or using tobacco products, whether it's chewing tobacco, e-cigarettes, snuff, cigars, cigarettes, whatever, there will be withdrawal associated with it. And the withdrawal's unpleasant, but it's not dramatic. I mean, you're antsy, you're nervous, you're agitated, sometimes you're verbally aggressive, easy to anger, etc. And there are, and then when you smoke again, all of those symptomologies will go away. You know, nicotine right now, there is no FDA indication for nicotine, but some studies suggest patches can improve memory. Maybe. Opiates, as you know, opiates are natural substances. Opium is the extract that you get from Papaver somniferum, the opium poppy, the red flowers, beautiful flower. From that raw opium, you can extract morphine, you can extract codeine, and you can take it into the laboratory and tinker with it and add a couple of acetyl groupings, and you can get diacetylmorphine, which is heroin. You can take the opium and dissolve it in alcohol and get laudanum. You can put it into other types of patent medicines and call it whatever you want to. So it's been around a long time. An opioid, on the other hand, is a derivative, is a synthetic. It's not really even a derivative. If it comes from the opium, it's an opiate. If it is manufactured in a lab, it's an opioid. And most of the problems that we see with, all of the problems that we see with prescription pain medication is an opioid problem. With heroin, opiate. But that's semantics, really. Nowadays, people are using the term opioid, opiate interchangeably, but there is a difference between them. Heroin is, one of the many opiates that we see has enjoyed a popularity, if you will, that's been fairly consistent over time. Not a lot of people use it, but the people who do use it are extremely dedicated to it. We've seen an increase in heroin users over recent years with the crackdown on the prescription pain medications, because there were people who became addicted to Vicodin and OxyContin. And honestly, if you've got pure heroin, the heroin's better for you than either one of those, because with OxyContin and Vicodin, there's acetaminophen and other products put in together with it that are, and they're taken in large amounts, are bad for you, really, really bad for your health, and cause some physical consequences. But heroin is a drug that society holds in contempt. I mean, you can be a lot of different things and not get devalued for it. But if you're an IV drug user shooting heroin, then as far as most of society is concerned, you're pretty much scum of the earth. This isn't a fair judgment, but it is a judgment. We had a law that one of our local policemen here in Baytown was instrumental in getting put together. It passed House Bill 225, and it passed through the House and the Senate and the Texas legislature and got to Governor Abbott's desk. And this is basically a Good Samaritan bill. And it said that staying with a person who is overdosed and assisting them until help arrived was a valid defense against being charged with possession or intoxication of illegal substances. And Governor Abbott vetoed the bill because he said, we're not going to let people who break our laws just break our laws. We're not. And it's a good piece of legislation, by the way. I don't much care for the governor for that reason and others. But anyway, the other opioid use, prescription medication, Percodan, Percocet, methadone, morphine, hydromorphone, Dilaudid, fentanyl, buprenorphine, all of these are narcotic substances. Detoxification is dramatic. I mean, this is where we got the term cold turkey, that when people just stop, they get sick. Their nose runs, they get diarrhea, they have stomach cramps, they vomit, they're nauseous, they get hot flashes and sweat like nobody's business, then shiver and shake and have goosebumps on them, which makes them look like a cold turkey that had been plucked and left out in the rain, which is where the expression came from. Nowadays we have other types of other methods of bringing people down. There's rapid detoxification that can happen. You go into a hospital, they put you under anesthesia, and they take your blood out, wash it, and put it back. And it gets all of the drug out of you quickly. I don't know if I would want to do that, but it's a thing. Use other opioids that are controlled and regulated to do a titration to step you down to a point where you can discontinue using any of them relatively comfortably. Or you can, be put into opioid replacement therapy. You can use Suboxone or buprenorphine and things like that. To bring you down. Summary of your opioids. Route of administration. That's a cute little picture over there. I think it's referencing the practice called chasing the dragon, which is smoking opium. It can also be smoking heroin or any other opiate, really, but generally chasing the dragon, smoking opium. Also referred to sometimes as kicking the gong. Cocaine use also referred to as kicking the gong. Old slang. Sedative hypnotic, CNS depressants. Number one, we spent this whole book just about talking about, which is alcohol. Most widely used CNS depressant in the world, probably, certainly in the United States. But there are others too. Benzodiazepines, barbiturates, meprobamate, chlorohydrate, GHB, which are, different variants of this particular drug. Usually you take it by mouth. Sometimes you snort it. Sometimes you shoot it, but that's rare. We're acquainted enough that I can say that the first time I was ever in a scene where IV drug use took place, it was a dude and he was shooting some seconal, which is a barbiturate, reds, and he'd got it in a syringe, and I was like 17 years old, and I was holding this guy's, he had pulled a belt around his arm, and I was holding it for him while he was shooting up, and when he shot up, I let go of the belt, and this guy stood there for a couple of seconds, and he got as white as this page over here, his eyes rolled up in his head, and he fell forward, making absolutely no attempt to catch himself, and smacked the floor and broke a couple of teeth. And I was out the door before the blood drops settled. I was quite sure he was dead. He wasn't, but it wasn't. It was by, I guess, the grace of God, good luck, or something, that he survived that. It scared the living hell out of me, though. And I have consequently never shot any barbiturates, or heroin either, because that'll make you a drug addict, These are drugs that are dangerous drugs, especially if you mix them with alcohol. These are the drugs that people take when they want to kill themselves and wash it down with wild turkey or Jim Beam or something like that to make it more likely that they'll die. The benzodiazepines are minor, and you don't see a lot of fatal ODs with those, but they're also referred to sometimes as minor tranquilizers. Anxiolytics are primarily what they're used for. Barbiturates, you're getting into the heavier drugs then. And then there are the other compounds. Some of them have a wider safety margin than others. Some are particularly, soma is a dangerous drug. Chloral hydrate can be a dangerous drug. All of them can be a dangerous drug. When you have withdrawal from these particular drugs, then you can have seizures. And when you have these seizures, withdrawing from the central nervous system depressants, and that includes alcohol, which is a dangerous drug to withdraw from, you could die. And there's a relatively high incidence of that. I mean, I think there's a 20% chance, 1 in 5, that someone who is going into withdrawal from alcohol will die from that withdrawal without medical treatment. So there are some problems with that. Stimulants, these are the CNS stimulants, the things that make you walk fast and talk fast and all of that kind of good stuff, right? They're not particularly a big risk for overdose, and they're not particularly they're not dangerous to withdraw from, and they're not particularly unpleasant. I mean, they're annoying more than anything else to withdraw from. You're not, again, it's almost like withdrawing from nicotine. Anxiety, nervousness, restlessness, wanting to sleep all the time, increase in appetite, that kind of thing. There are medical and psychiatric consequences to taking it. It does bad things to your body and works it harder than it should be working. It produces psychiatric issues, because if you stay up for days at a time and don't eat and take care of yourself, weird stuff happens, including losing touch with reality and stuff like that. But it's tough to overdose with amphetamine, methamphetamine, or those type drugs. An exception to that is cocaine. Cocaine its popularity peaked in 85, and it's been going downhill since, for the most part. People still do cocaine, they still do crack and things, but it doesn't enjoy the popularity that it once did. Nasal inhalation, like cocaine will, was the preferred route forever and a day. Injection is another route. It's the one that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle provided for Sherlock Holmes, his famous literary detective who liked to shoot cocaine. And freebasing emerged in the 70s as a method of using cocaine, and then pre-based cocaine grew out of that, where you could go, or crack, you could get the cocaine that was already based for you. Cocaine, you can overamp and die, usually, again, having a seizure and a heart attack. The withdrawal from it, problems with it, cocaine blues, what are they? It's an anhedonic state that you get by smoking so much cocaine or snorting so much cocaine. This goes back into what we talked about earlier in this class and also in other classes about rebound effects. You take a drug to go up, and when it wears off, you come down, and you come down pretty far. So it's like throwing a ball against the wall. If you haul off and throw the rubber ball against the wall, it's going to bounce back at you. Sometimes, depending on what the wall and the ball are made of, it will come back at you at the same speed. Sometimes it will come back a little slower. Sometimes it will come back faster. And so as you use these types of medications or these types of substances, a better way of putting it, to go up, when it wears off, you come down. And with that rebound effect, you also you tend to come back down further than the point where you went up at. And so you feel bad. You've got a complication there. The use of cocaine depletes neurochemicals in your brain. You don't have the chemicals to feel good with until they're replenished, so there's an issue with that. Hallucinogens and dissociatives. Dissociatives are things like Rohypnol and GHB and things like that. Hallucinogens are drugs that interfere with normal brain processes and cause you to do exactly what the name indicates. They cause you to hallucinate, to see things in a different way, hear things that other people don't hear, smell things, see things in a different way. You can have micropsia or macropsia, where you, and this is kind of like Alice through the looking glass, where she took one bite of a mushroom and she's 10 feet tall, macropsia, and she takes a bite off the other side of the mushroom and she's just 10 inches tall, and that's micropsia. And so these, you have those types of perceptual distortions when you take hallucinogens. You'll get visual distortions. You might listen to some music and see the sound pulsing in the air in colors. You might taste it. You might smell it. And that's called synesthesia that we talked about a while ago. Phencyclidine is a dissociative and kind of a scary one. If you remember the Rodney King incidents of the 90s when the riots in South Central LA that started with the police beating Rodney King, it's a pretty unforgettable clip of video to see where this African-American man's on the ground and a bunch of white cops with nightsticks are standing around him beating the hell out of him. And it sparked a lot of protest. But one of the policemen made a statement in his trial that said, I thought he was dusted. I wasn't going to let him up, And even though that was I'm not defending anyone, that was a terrible thing to witness. at the time in famous cop school, they taught you if the guy doesn't submit, beat him some more. Do what you got to do to subdue him. So that was kind of consistent with policy at the time. But the cops were no-billed, more riots ensued, etc. But phencyclidine, PCP, is a drug that causes hallucination, and it was first developed as an anesthesia, so that when you're under the influence, you don't feel pain. And so it's one of the drugs that its scary reputation is well deserved. Dextromethorphan, an antitussive ingredient found in most over-the-counter cough syrups. You drink enough of it as an hallucinogen, a dissociative that causes a physiological high. Then you got the designer drugs that are in the hallucinogenic categories, the amphetamine derivatives like MDMA, etc., and so forth. PCP, ketamine, DOM, DMT, mescaline, psilocybin, and hundreds of other drugs, ayahuasca, heavenly blues, flying saucers, morning glory seeds, all of this kind of good stuff. Club drugs I've already talked about, but I'll talk about them again. Ecstasy, GHB, Rohypnol, and in some cases PCP, because you're getting that when you think you're getting something else. These were called club drugs or rave drugs. Remember raves when they were all the rave? They're used in those settings. That doesn't mean that everyone who was at a rave or at a dance or at a club was using these substances, because they certainly weren't. But some were, and they were very popular in those scenes. There were people at Edgar Winter concerts in the 70s who didn't smoke weed when it came around time to pass it to them, but they passed it on. Not everybody at a rock concert is under the influence either, but a lot of us were. I know I did my part. Anyway, cannabis is not native to North America. It was imported from Europe, and it was grown in the colonies, and it was a cash crop in the colonies. And it's a cash crop in the Americas still today. It's grown from South America, probably the very tip of South America, right on up into Alaska. It's been introduced pretty much everywhere. It's grown in Central and South America, Mexico, United States, Canada, and so there's plenty of it around if you want it. And then it's grown hydroponically and has been grown by people who apply all the scientific principles of advanced horticulture to crop development, etc. And it is by far the most widely used illicit drug. You can grow it in your house or in your backyard or wherever you want to do it. Society doesn't view marijuana use as direly as it used to. The consequences of marijuana use in terms of jail time is not as dire as they used to be. Once upon a time, in my lifetime, you could get 2 years to life in the Texas state penal system for possession of marijuana. There was no such thing as felony or misdemeanor possession. It was all felony. So there you have it. Dependence can happen with marijuana, but compared to those who use other drugs, it's, not that big a deal. Most people who use drugs, and this is worth reiterating, most people who experiment with drugs don't become addicted to the drugs, but some of them do. And most people who use these recreational chemicals, for lack of a better term, they try and go, oh, that was interesting, and go on with their lives. Others of us become real dedicated and devoted to the use of these substances. What else do I want to say about that? We talked about medical marijuana extensively in the pharmacology class, but I'll touch on it here again. There are good, acceptable, scientifically supported uses for marijuana. This has been indicated in other countries. Israel is probably the country that has done the most research in this field, and they've got some scientists over there who really have been creative in setting up studies for what marijuana might be useful to treat. And they found that it was useful for a lot of things, including regulating high blood pressure, treating glaucoma, treating cancer, treating, as an antiemetic, preventing nausea, increasing appetites, etc., and so forth. So it's got a lot of good uses. And there are extracts from marijuana that can be used to treat these conditions as well. Some states in the United States have made it okay to use marijuana medicinally, and some of them have made it okay to use it recreationally, and these states are at odds with federal law. The governor of Oregon, I can't remember his name, in the 2000s, when was it? It was Bush's Attorney General, Ashcroft. I can't remember what year it was. But A.G. Ashcroft objected to the use of medical marijuana in Oregon, and he kind of wrote a letter to the governor and said, you really should stop doing this, cease and desist. And the governor of Oregon responded by saying, we're not going to do it. If you want to enforce federal laws in Oregon, send federal law enforcement down here to do it. And that was kind of the end of that. So anyway, we're going to be dealing with that in Texas pretty soon. There's already discussions of it in the legislature, and there are people coming down on one side or another, but chances are pretty good that the market for marijuana and marijuana products are going to be opening up in Texas sometime in the future. That's not the good news for some people, and it is the good news for others. I don't know where you fall on that, but it is a reality. We'll see how that goes. Inhalants. These are most generally CNS depressants, and they're very dangerous, by the way. Poppers, amyl and butyl nitrate, nitrous oxide or laughing gas, volatile solvents with acetone and methylethyl ketone and all of this good stuff in it that causes highs, that has significant risk of brain damage, has significant risk of poisoning, has significant risk of damage to other organs, etc., and so forth. Inhalant use is usually found actually in minority populations, in poorer populations. We used to see a lot of inhalant abuse in the inner city, used to see a lot of inhalant abuse on the reservations, and in jails, not because they're, because in jail it's, leave no turn unstoned with whatever you can get. Inhalants tend to affect the same parts of the brain as the other CNS depressants do. but because of the other additives that are included, they do significant damage to the lungs, the throat, the nose, the liver, etc. And as I said, they have an organic brain syndrome that's associated with them because of the toxic effect, and it can create psychological and intellectual problems in a relatively short period of time for people who use them heavily. And again, this is another area where you don't have to be dependent to have an acute problem with this. It can get real serious real fast. The first time you use it, or the last time you use it, or any time in between. Patterns of use, I think we've talked about that plenty enough. Routes of administration too. Steroids. These are some drugs that we will see people having problems with. Not a lot. I mean, I have never had a lot of clients who were abusers of anabolic steroids. I have known people who are abusers of anabolic steroids, and I have known people in programs who were abusers of anabolic steroids, HGH, the human growth hormones, ephedrine and ephedra, and these are all lumped under the heading of performance enhancing drugs, or PEDs. These are substances that things like the Olympics committee, the schools and the college associations and the NFL and them Major League Baseball, etc., they test for to see if their players are using these things, which in their eyes is cheating. But regardless of how you feel about that, these are some drug problems that we may encounter with people. And the author asks us to reflect that this is by far a complete catalog of drugs associated with athletics and improving performance. They certainly are right about that. You also see an increased use of other illicit drugs that don't improve performance, like marijuana, alcohol, etc., and pain medication. A lot of people get their pain pill addiction, and I know several of them who were athletes. I say a lot of people, I guess any is too much, but I know some people who got their pain pill addiction started because they were taking it in high school and college and, in professional sports. So, caffeine is listed as a PED, oddly enough. Caffeine is probably the most widely used stimulant drug in the world. Maybe up there neck and neck with tea. There are caffeine abusers, and caffeine is an addictive substance, and caffeine creates a withdrawal syndrome as well. No one overdoses on caffeine, really, unless you're doing it in a really odd form, maybe eating tons of caffeinated pills, for instance. But is a minor stimulus, methylxanthine, and we talked about those in the pharmacology class. You get caffeine from coffee, theobromine from chocolate, theophylline from tea, and they all have similar effects. withdrawal, you're annoyed, you feel like strangling small animals and things like that. The agitated, cranky, sometimes want to sleep a lot, low energy levels, etc., that are associated, and headache associated with the withdrawal. Is it a substance of abuse? It can be. Substances of abuse, again, are something that's defined by society, really, and by laws. People don't necessarily accept the idea that, I don't necessarily accept that idea that what I'm using is abuse of something. This seems rational to me. Does that make sense? And abuse, drug abuse, it might be something like the word promiscuity. How many partners do you have to be promiscuous? Well, that's subjective, isn't it? I think it's probably one more than I have. So, and you may think it's one more than you have. But what constitutes abuse from a societal perspective? So all of these drugs can be used in ways that they weren't intended to use. And if using a drug, even say ayahuasca, a hallucinogen, in the way it was intended to be used as a hallucinogen, is that abuse? Well, we could argue about that, I suppose. But these are some drugs: kava, khat, got, betel nut, tobacco, salvia divorium, all of this good stuff, kratom. There are all sorts of substances out there that people that don't fit easily into current categorizations, but are nevertheless out there anyway. And I think that's about all I want to say about these other drugs. DSM-5 diagnostic criteria for alcohol intoxication and amphetamine intoxications, I'm not going to go over those individually because you can read too. We've talked about them in other circumstances. Treatment goals vary from agency to agency depending upon what the philosophy is of the treatment center, the people providing the treatment, and treatment goals vary depending on the client, what the client wants to do. My goal for most everyone I ever run across is abstinence. They may not see it that way. I remember arguing with my sponsor, who was a counselor, but I wasn't seeing him professionally, about how come it was okay for me to smoke marijuana. I'd give up speed and cocaine and hallucinogens and alcohol and all that good stuff. I still smoked, of course, and drank coffee, but it was okay for me to smoke marijuana because I don't really like marijuana all that much, and I think it's a boring drug, and I never use it alone, only when I'm with some other people. I don't like the effect of it. I can't roll good joints. The seeds always pop and burn my clothes. In the old days we had seeds in our marijuana. It was a great deal of trouble to get them out, by the way. So all of that. And he's nodding his head along with me, and he said, I see. What you're telling me is that you don't like weed, you don't like the effects, you're not good at smoking it, yada, yada, yada. And I'm nodding along with him, nodding my head too. And he said, so it's okay for you to use weed because anything beats being sober. And that pulled me up, and I said, that's not what I said. And he said, yeah, it kind of is, you know. And I had to stop and think about it, and it kind of is. Harm reduction was not something that was really on the radar for me. Again, from looking at the record, looking at attempts to regulate, etc., and so forth, and in my best interest. Also, at the time, harm reduction was not a concept that was very popular. So, abstinence was the thing. For some people, harm reduction may work, you know, but people who show up in our offices generally, not so much. Anyway, overdose emergency kits. If you have narcotics addicts in your life, it's good to have one of these things around, because you can introduce naloxone into the system by shooting it into their nose, and it'll put them into a relatively immediate withdrawal and keep them from dying. Drug replacement therapy, substituting one drug for another. Methadone maintenance. Does methadone maintenance cure people of their heroin addiction? No, it doesn't. But methadone is a drug that you can obtain legally. Methadone is a drug that is pharmacologically controlled, that there are quality control measures in place to make sure that you get the right amount, right purity, etc., and so forth. It can be prescribed to you with specific dosages. It can be used to titrate your dosage down till you get to a place where you can stop, or you can just go ahead on and continue using the drug as long as you like. There's debate about that, but what does it do? Does it help the person who's using the methadone to stop at some point? It can, but one of the things it does is it interdicts upon the crazy lifestyle of a narcotic addict. It basically keeps them out of your apartment so that they're not stealing your stereo and your big screen TV and stuff like that. Anti-craving drugs, buprenorphine, blocking agents, naltrexone. All of these are used in medical assisted treatment nowadays. Naltrexone and naloxone are blocking agents. They're similar. Naloxone is Narcan, and it's used almost exclusively in emergency rooms in the effects of overdose. It's very potent. It's administered intravenously and nasally. You can shoot it up someone's nose, and it has a rapid onset, and it reverses overdose. But it also, what it does is it replaces the opioid molecule at the receptor site, and it kicks the opiate, whichever it is that you're taking, opiate, opioid, it will have the same effect, but it will kick the receptor off, kick the drug off at the receptor site and then block the site so it can't work. And this puts you into kind of immediate withdrawal. So that's naltrexone. And naloxone is damn it, where'd it go? What did I do? Oh, there it is. Naloxone can cause seizures and heart attacks when it's used. Disulfiram is also referred to as a blocking agent. It's a disincentive to drinking. Disulfiram is antabuse. It makes you sick as hell. But it too, it doesn't really block the effects of alcohol. It interferes with the breakdown of acetaldehyde and causes high levels of acetaldehyde, which makes you sick. There's been some discussion about looking at developing vaccines that would create a barrier for drugs to interact with the brain. And how would that be distributed and to whom and under what conditions, et cetera, and so forth, especially in this era of COVID-19, raises about 1 million questions about what we should do with that. Pregnancy creates its own issues. There are a lot of drugs that shouldn't be used, whether they're pharmaceutical or illicit or whatever, if you're pregnant. Children who are exposed to drugs while in utero are affected by those drugs after they're born. We have children right now who are in hospital beds here in Harris County who are trying to kick a drug addiction, first job they have out of the womb. I'll let you read all that for yourself. I beat policy and legal issues to death. International comparisons. I'm not going to go there. And I'm going to call it finished, which is great because I'm finishing up 4 minutes late for another meeting. So that's how life goes, isn't it? So I will see you guys later. Bye.